Now, there are, of course, lots of videos about differences between INFJs and INFPs. Not as many as about the differences between INFJs and ENFJs. One reason being that people tend to take it for granted that ENFJs and INFJs are very different. And the reason why they take it for granted is that the view of INFJs is usually that INFJs are quite introverted and that ENFJs are quite extroverted, even among the extroverted types. And I don't disagree with this. I think it's true on average. But if you leave that aside for a moment, it still remains the case that ENFJs are a continuum and INFJs are a continuum. INFJs can be on the side of extroversion without quite touching it, and ENFJs can be on the side of introversion without quite touching it. And so if you take an example of such an INFJ and an example of such an ENFJ, what you get is a situation where it might actually not be so easy to tell the difference. And that's where, again, this notion of the difference between feeling and emotion becomes handy. If you remember my previous video, I explained that an emotion is the same depending on whether I feel it or someone else feels it. Anger, pain, joy, fear, sadness, surprise, and so forth. But it's always expressed as a feeling in a human being because it's always colored by the particular life of that human being. What's happened to that human being and what that human being has lived through. So, for example, it's about what you've done, it's about what you've been through, it's also about what you've been endowed with by your creator, if you like, including your type. So feeling is an expression of type, emotion is not an expression of type. That's also a nice way of emphasizing that all types have emotions to the same degree, but not the same feelings. And INFJs and ENFJs don't express emotion, that is to say, they don't feel the same way. What's interesting is that FE in some ways is less, in some ways it's less complicated than FI because it's less internal. And in other ways, it's more complicated than FI because it's not just internal. FE is a mix of internal and external, if you like, a mix of subjective and objective. I don't think Carl Jung was correct to emphasize almost entirely that FE is objective feeling. It is also subjective purely insofar as it is a cognitive functions. And a cognitive function, once it is embodied in a particular person, becomes at least in part subjective. So FE is also subjective, whilst being objective. But then you can really tell the difference between the INFJ's FE, which is way more subjective and way more internal, than in the ENFJ's FE, which is way more objective and way more external. Quite simply because the ENFJ's FE is subservient to no one, whereas the INFJ's FE is subservient to someone, and that's NI. And NI is a deeply subjective, a deeply internal function. And that inevitably is always going to color the feeling of INFJs as FE and its objective cravings being, at the end of the day, subservient to their inner worldview. And you won't feel that nearly as much with ENFJs. In fact, what you'll see with ENFJs is their inner worldview being subservient to their objective feeling. Let me know in the comments what you thought, guys. Give me a like if you thought that was useful. Don't forget about my 2 books about INFJs. The latest one is called The Infinite Soul, INFJ Life in the Modern World. Check the links below if you're interested. It's helped a lot of people, and so has The Ecstatic Soul, the first book in the Soul series about INFJs, a new look at the INFJ personality. And this looks in detail on how INFJs think, what the INFJ mind is like. Link is below. And finally, guys, don't forget that it's hugely helpful to get your kind support via Patreon. So I could not do it without you, really, to keep this channel going. So please consider supporting me at the link below to my Patreon. You get access to some cool perks like our special Discord server and a bonus video every 2-3 weeks just for patrons on the topic of your choosing. If that sounds good, see you there. Bye bye, guys.